The topic on which I have been asked to speak, Why Democracy Matters, is not only thought-provoking but provocative, because it implies other questions. Does democracy matter? Does it still matter? Did it ever matter? To all those questions, I could give a resounding yes. Burma is one of those countries that lost democracy and are trying to find it again. I was fortunate to be part of a generation that grew up in a democratic society. When Burma became independent in 1948, we became independent as a parliamentary democracy. As a child, I took for granted freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of the press. These, for us, were common fare. And in those days, in spite of the fact that we had been plagued by armed insurgencies almost from the time of independence, we were one of the most progressive and vibrant nations in our region. We had a health system with which our people were satisfied, although of course always looking for something better, which is as it should be. We also had an education system which was sound and respected, not just in our region, but all over the world. And this, as I said, in spite of the many insurgencies with which we had to cope. We were able to achieve this because the government of our country was rooted in the elements of good governance, accountability and transparency, which are rooted in democracy. So I could say that democracy matters. It matters for progress. It matters for development. It matters particularly in a country like ours, made up of many ethnic nationalities. Unity out of diversity is possible only in an environment where peaceful, non-violent political means can be used to achieve the kind of society where we can coexist in spite of our differences, where people are confident that they will be given a fair hearing, where they believe that the basic foundation of justice and freedom would ensure their rights as citizens of one country, whatever their race, religion, or political ideologies might be. I mentioned justice and freedom specifically because a couple of weeks ago I met some school children. They were about 8, 9, 10, that age group. I asked them what they understood by democracy. One little boy said freedom, and then a little girl said justice. I thought that was not bad, considering the fact that they had been born into a military dictatorship and had never really experienced a full-fledged democracy in which they could be confident of their rights. But why justice and freedom? Why do people care so much about access to justice, access to freedom? Because it is only if we can be assured of justice and freedom that we can be confident that our voices will be heard. And hearing the voice of the people, listening to the voice of the people, taking into account the aspirations of the people are essential elements of democracy. So democracy matters. It matters for peace. It matters for peace in a multi-ethnic society. It matters for peace in a world where there are great diversities. In our country, we have been fighting for human rights and democracy when the people rose up against the dictatorial socialist, Burma Socialist Party program government. It's a very long name, and but it was nothing like as effective an administration as its title. In the days of the perhaps it was Burma Socialist Party program rather than Burmese, but in any case, in those days, we did not understand what human rights meant. We'd lost track even of what democracy meant. Generations grew up with no knowledge of a working democracy. Because we were totally ignorant of what democracy meant in practical terms, when the 1988 uprising broke out, there were those who questioned whether the people knew what it was they wanted. It is quite normal for authoritarian regimes to say that the people are not ready for democracy, that people in general, meaning to say the ordinary people, those who are not in government, would not know what to do with regard to the needs of the nation. This was an insult that was imposed on our people as well. The military dictatorship always claimed that our people were not yet ready to take matters into their own hands, that they were not experienced enough, they were not mature enough, they were not good enough to carve out their own future. This is something we have had to fight against for the last nearly 3 decades. We have to prove not only that democracy matters, but democracy matters because our people matter. Democracy recognizes the worth of each individual as well as the worth of the individuals as a group, as a whole, making up a nation. The voice of the people is what matters in democracy. And we have to prove to those who stand against such democratic values that our people are capable of articulating their aspirations and their needs in a way that will sustain our society and bring genuine development. I've said that genuine development means enhancement of the human spirit. It is not simply material progress. Material progress has been achieved in countries where there have been many questions raised with regard to whether it has meant genuine progress for the people as human beings. This is where I think democracy has an advantage. We can, through democracy, progress materially as well as spiritually. The word spiritual may sound a little strange in a discussion on political democracy, which is what I assume this is about. But when I use the word spiritual, I use it in a very broad sense. I use it in a sense of that spirit which makes human beings human, not merely animals who possess the power of speech and are capable of walking on 2 legs. So if we want to enhance the worth of our people, we have to recognize that they are capable of taking care of their own future. We have to recognize that they have the right not only to demand that they have a say in how their future is shaped, but they have the capacity to implement their ideas, that they have the capacity to fulfill their hopes through the kind of action that would be acceptable in a democratic society. That is to say, through discussion and debate. Democracy matters because it helps to develop the better facets of human nature. If we do not recognize the capacity of human beings to look after themselves and to look after their fellow human beings, to look after their fellow citizens, then we will not be able to build a world where responsibility goes hand in hand with rights, and where each and every human being learns to recognize that his right should not in any way obstruct the rights of others, that his innate dignity depends very much on how much dignity he allows his fellow citizens, his fellow human beings. So democracy matters for the sake of human dignity. In my country, democracy matters more than ever today because we are just starting out on the road to democratization. This, of course, may come as a disappointment to some who would like to believe that we are well on the road to democratization. I'm afraid this is not so. We are just at the beginning of the road and in danger of coming to a full stop. I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that we have been working for constitutional amendments in our country. Constitutional amendments are essential if Burma is to become a true working democracy. This present constitution is so drawn up that the elected representatives of the people, and here for the time being, let us leave aside the question of how fair or unfair the elections of 2010 were that put into place a so-called civilian government. We have to make sure that the elected representatives of the people genuinely reflect the power of the people as it should exist in a democracy. I want to make it quite clear that I'm not talking about the power of the people as something that is exercised only in the streets, as some now seem to assume. The power of the people must be made felt through all the institutions of the country, through the executive, through the legislature, through the judiciary. The judiciary is most important. My party has repeatedly emphasized rule of law because of the very fact that our judiciary is far from independent. It is a mere tool of the executive. That means not just that the judiciary is undemocratic, but the executive is undemocratic as well. And the legislature, too, is undemocratic. Not because we have not been trying, not because we have not been working hard as a very young legislature to live up to the standards and values of democracy, but because the legislature is made up of 75% elected members and 25% nominated non-elected members. And these 25% have the right to decide whether or not our constitution can be amended. This is contrary to all norms of democracy, that an unelected group should be able to decide what our elected representatives are not allowed to decide is totally unacceptable. Because we suffer from a lack of true democratic practices, we know better than those who take democracy for granted that democracy truly matters. Democracy matters for progress, democracy matters for peace, democracy matters for human dignity, democracy matters for us in Burma, where we are trying to once again make our society a democratic one, where each voice counts and where our people are a united and peaceful nation made up of different races, different religions, different political beliefs, and different personal beliefs. We want democracy because it matters to us, and we would like to believe that it also matters to you that we should be able to achieve democracy. So while talking about why democracy matters for the whole world, I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that this is a time when democracy matters, particularly in our country and other countries like Burma, which are struggling to assert their democratic identity. Thank you.